Welcome, everybody. This is the January 29th AI update for the AIX Higher Ed podcast. And it's a new year, but what a January so far. Lots of developments. And I'm going to turn it over to Stefan to say a little bit about the Substack and what we're going to focus on today.
As we discussed last week, we changed the format a little bit. On my Substack, Education Disrupted, going to cover all the major developments over the last week. And then here we focus on a few of them. We're going to focus on, which was originally Clawdbot. Now they're calling it Moltbot. And Anand will talk about why. We're going to talk about Claude Co-Work, the new essay from Dario Amodei. It's 70 pages. I thought of printing it out, and then I realized it was 70 pages. And we'll also cover some robotics. Some of the other topics that cover on the Substack is coding, recursive self-improvement, a lot of advances in math and science, a little more movement towards AGI, how AI is being used in industry, the impact on jobs, government adoption, energy. There's been some research. Interesting thing, this will get you to read the Substack. Netflix is telling producers to put the similar or the same scene in 4 times because they realize that people are scrolling through their phones. So for all your professors and teachers out there, make sure you say everything in class 4 times so your students will remember it. But a little bit into the future, how maybe we're underestimating AI and some of the direct things we've seen in education. So the Substack's really full if you want to at least skim through it.
A lot of important topics there that we wish we had more time to be able to go through, but we'll focus on these few for this week and highlight a few things that we think are particularly important, in part because of the coverage they're getting. And I'll start with the first one. And this is an open source program available on GitHub called Moltbot. And it actually was first called Claudebot. And you can probably guess why it's changed names. And that's because Claudebot sounds a lot like Claude, Anthropic's LLM. They were in contact with the developer and said, you really need to change the name. It sounds too much like Claude. So a couple of interesting things about this. When it started as Claudebot, CLAWD, and the mascot for it was this space lobster. Interesting backstory to that. There's some questions as to whether this was more influenced for the developer from Dr. Who, because there's a tagline that they use, exfoliate instead of exterminate. But then the space lobster is also a throwback to the novel Accelerando, which is a sci-fi book from 2005 that I first heard referenced from Alex Wiesner-Gross talking about it on the Moonshots podcast. In that first chapter, there are sentient lobsters that are then uploaded into the AI and sent out into space. And so this idea of having a space lobster as the mascot for Claudebot, now Moltbot, is pretty interesting. The developer, who's a developer from Australia, I believe, really leaned into this story when they had to change the name. Of course, then molting is what a lobster is going to do as it moves out of its shell and moves into a bigger form. And that's what Claudebot has now done. It's now called Moltbot, but they've been able to retain that mascot of the space lobster. And if you go to claude.bot, you'll find this website, Moltbot. And the tagline is that it's the AI that actually does things. What's interesting about this is that it's similar in some ways to some open source AI assistant models that we've seen before. And I remember even a year and a half, 2 years ago, playing with one that was, I think it was called Godbot or something like that, where it would supposedly work in agentic workflows on your own device, and you had to access it through the terminal. This is one that is not just another chatbot. It's really a shift, though, in where you're interacting with the assistant and how it behaves. And so it's important to think of it this way. When you download this open source software and you install it, you're setting it up on your own device or on perhaps a virtual device that you have online, or maybe a separate device you have in your own home, but you control it and it actually operates on that device. It also operates a little differently. And there's some things about this as a personal assistant that is getting a lot of attention. The reason why the attention has been skyrocketing over the last couple of weeks is I understand that this was first released, I think, late November. There were certainly a number of people that were using it through December, but over the last week or so, that has skyrocketed. Another like 20,000 downloads in a day, and getting to the point where a lot of people were talking about it. It's not terribly easy to install, but it's also not that difficult. And I'll show you. There's actually a guide that I found on X, and it's posted by Damien Player. And if you look for Damien Player and find his X account, you'll be able to find this guide. And it's the full setup in 30 minutes. I found this yesterday and I thought I'd give it a try, and it didn't even take 30 minutes. I was able to set up an AWS account that was free that would allow me to set up a virtual server to be able to run Claudebot, Moltbot now, as the way I would like to run it. All I had to do was add in an API code. And in this case, I used Claude because it was perfect to use Claude on Claudebot. And I already had an API key for my Claude account, my Anthropic account. And then it's just a matter of using the tokens and paying for the tokens that you're using. There's some things about this that are causing people to get hooked. It's different than some other AI assistants. And first of all, it has some persistent memory. The more you use it, it starts to learn and then able to record some of your preferences. You can have recurring tasks. You can have ongoing projects. That's really important. Then there's also an element of it that's fairly proactive. It doesn't just wait for you to reach out to it, and it will actually reach out when there's something developed. And so if you can set it up to have recurring tasks, it can reach out to you with updates or can ask you for more information to guide what you like to do. And also the interaction is different. You could certainly interact with it through a terminal code line, but it's also set up so that you can interact with it through a messaging platform that you already use. So I interact with mine through Telegram, or you can have it set up through WhatsApp. And it just shows up as like a friend you might have that you're interacting with in that messenger app. And then you're able to correspond back and forth, and it can then prompt you there. So you can set it up in an app that you already have open, that you regularly use, and you can have that kind of interaction. It'll also allow for more automation. And this is where people are starting to build out different elements and tools that it's capable of using. I've limited mine right now. I don't have it I haven't given it access to any of my files, my Google Drive, my calendar, or my email account yet. But I've just started doing things like allowing it to do web searches, being able to find information. And I think I'll start playing around with adding some of those other capabilities just to get a sense of what this means, what it looks like. I don't really think that Moltbot is going to be the model that is going to go forward for very long as standalone. I think it'll be updated. I'm sure there's some interesting things that you can do with it. I think it's really useful to play around with because you get a better sense of what that user interface is like, how it's different than just using an online bot. And it also changes kind of the workflow. You start to think of it as a coworker, a collaborator that you have in that messaging app that you can start to interact with. It's kind of like how Perplexity allowed for accounts and you could interact with it on WhatsApp and you can send messages and have it give you the responses. It's kind of like that, but that was a little more two-dimensional. And this allows it to be a little more full, more proactive, be able to do more recurring things. Here's an example of something I just interacted with it today, just before the podcast. I asked it, tell me what you are. What do you do? And by the way, when it asked me what name I wanted to give it, I said, I'm going to name you Hal. And it immediately said, I'm sorry, Anand, I'm afraid I can't do that. So it immediately got the 2001 Space Odyssey joke. And now it references itself as, Hal, my personal assistant, named after the infamous HAL 9000, but hopefully with better judgment about airlocks. So, it's drawing from Claude, and it certainly does still reach out to the large language model through that API call, but the rest of the work is being done on that server that I have control over. And I can keep it private. If I wanted to do it on my own machine, some people are setting up their own Mac minis to be able to run this at home. You could then give it access to your own personal files. And this is really moving in the direction, we'll see this with Co-Work in a minute when Stefan starts talking about Claude's Co-Work, where it's moving from cloud-based and working online as much as working with local files and local materials. That's another aspect of this that I think is changing the workflow and our understanding of it. I would encourage you to check this out. If you follow the guidelines that the Damien player has, it's very relatively easy to do. I'm not really technical. I was able to get it set up in about 20 minutes or so. And it gives you a chance to see what this agentic AI system might be like, what you might be able to do with it, and you can start to add capabilities as you wish. I don't think this is the end. This is really just a stepping stone towards more agentic AI personal assistants. Somebody's going to be able to create this in a way with a more kind of a graphical user interface, I'm sure, and make money off of it. But for now, this is a good intermediary step, and it's something to think about as we're also playing around with new tools like Claude's Co-Work.
And, to pick up on that in a couple ways, you mentioned the technical, neither of us are super technical, but we find these things pretty easy to use. And I'm sure we'll get to the point where it's just an app like you download right onto your computer and, everything's set up. You don't have to put in the API key or anything like that, just like most of the software online services we use. Second, talk some more this week about Claude Co-Work. I've been using it more. I know you've been using it more. Love to hear what you're thinking, but it's kind of maybe it doesn't do everything I keep calling it Claudebot, but the Omnibot does. But it does a lot of things, right? And I posted on my Substack, and I had consolidated a lot of the value of debate in an AI world work I did, partially, really starting for a project that we're working on. And I had kind of linked it all just kind of into a Google Doc so we could actually, just kind of more easily use the stuff. But what I did was I asked Claude to go to the Google Doc and save all the articles that were linked there, to open them up and save them, download them as PDFs right onto my local hard drive, including creating a folder on the drive. And it did that. And it got, sometimes it would go to the Substack. Some of the articles were there and other places. And it first tried to print the articles to PDF, which is, what most of us do when we have a PDF, but it had a little trouble with that. So it wrote a script to create a PDF writer, and then it just wrote everything to PDFs, and it downloaded them. I didn't know how it would download them, but it downloaded them all by the titles. A couple of times it said, well, there's really a lot of articles. Are you sure you want me to download all these? And I said, yes, but it would go through it. And then it figured out how the Substack creates the URLs. So then it was like, oh, I can go faster by just guessing the UDL format based on the title of the articles. So it did that. It was able to speed itself up. So, guess the URLs, wrote scripts. In one case, it was a paywalled copy. So it had trouble. So it went and found a non-paywalled copy on its own, and it saved that. It saved that as well. And I asked it, to save it all into this folder. And I also asked it I left my Gemini open. I asked it to make an image, and it made an image. And what I really then thought to do was, I've been meaning to write an article that just talks about, the different themes I have about the benefits of debate, whether it's reading or, active listening, the different themes. And I just said, hey, can you read all the articles that you saved into the into the Dropbox or into the folder? I didn't put I didn't actually, just to clarify, I usually put everything in the Dropbox, but I was a little nervous. Do I want to give it access to my Dropbox? So, the folder was just created on the desktop. I told it to do that. So it was just there. But I said, hey, can you read all these articles and pull out the major themes and write a Substack post about how I, see the benefits of debate in the AI world? And it did. And it just really crushed it. I was like, wow, it really identified all the themes. It organized it. It was really good with my ideas, created an intro. And so, I thought, and even then it asked me some additional questions, which I don't have here along the way. So I really kind of viewed it as, that kind of basic research assistant, you might ask them, if I had a paid research assistant, be like, hey, can you read all these articles I wrote and download them, put them in a folder, kind of organize them or whatever. If you wanted to push your research assistants to develop some skills, you might have them read them all and see how they do, identifying all the common themes. But here, Claude Co-Work just did all that.
I was going to say a little bit about Claude Co-Work. We mentioned last week how this was developed, that the developer at Anthropic who built Claude Code built this with Claude Code. And to let you know that this is a really accessible tool. If you have, I believe it's available for the Pro account now, $20 a month. It was, when it first came out, only available for those that had a $100 a month account or higher, but I believe it's now available anybody with a paid account. But there's no coding involved with this at all. So if you have a paid account with Claude and you have the Mac version of the desktop software for Claude, you're able to then open up Claude Co-Work or Claude Code. But with Co-Work, there's zero code. There's no terminal line. There are no codes that you need to give or commands that you need to give. It's just a natural language interaction to be able to tell it what you'd like it to do, and you get to control which folders it has access to. So it has a little bit more control for some safety reasons of what it will have access to, what you would like it to be able to do. But it really does extend the capabilities of using Claude within the Chrome, because you can still have it interact with the tab or a tab group on Chrome. You can have it access to either local files. And so it's something that if you have access to Claude, you should definitely try it out.
Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide.
Next one. Okay.
Yeah. And then, one other thing I did, I just thought to do this the other night when I was kind of playing around with Claude Code. I was like, I wonder, if I could get it to send an email. And I had my Outlook on the web open. So I just said, hey, can you go into my Outlook? It's open, and write an email to technology director. I was afraid to do it to anyone else. They might freak out where I work. that just said, hey, he's a cool guy. So yeah, it just kind of opened, went over to the tab and it opened it and it looked up his name. I just gave his name, not his email address. And it first found 2 emails from them. One time I'd emailed him at his personal email. So it brought up both emails and then it said, well, this is like a work email being sent from your work account. So let's use the work email. And it created the subject line. It wrote the email. There's even a kind of a thing that comes up. It was like after 11 o'clock. It was like, oh, do you want to send an email outside business hours? They're not between 11 or 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. I think it was. And I didn't do anything. It just decided, yeah, I want to send this email now. So it inserted the subject line. And then it went in. The only thing that was a little tricky is I thought it was going to fail. There's an automatic signature file that comes up and it put the email like right in the middle of the signature file. But then without me doing anything, it said, hey, like I just put the email right in the middle of the signature file. But it shouldn't be there. So then it moved the email up to where it's supposed to go. The only thing it didn't do was include the signature file. And, policy, you're always supposed to, have your signature file on your email. So that was the only thing it didn't do. It did ask me first to send if it was okay to send it. It went and it sent the email. And even though it was late, I did send him an email. Like, by the way, I was just testing out Claude Co-Work because I said, to sign it like from Stefan, written by Claude or something like that. I didn't want him to think his email got hacked or something like that. I actually told some people at work about this today, and they were shocked. They had no idea that this could be done. And it did take a long time. It took at least like 20 minutes for it to do this. And, some people would say, well, yeah, but you could, yeah, I could have done it in like 20 seconds, right? It was just a simple email. But that's not the point. I mean, you think, okay, it maybe a year from now, maybe less. And I'm not even going to have to do this by text. I'm going to say, hey, send Joe an email that says X. And it's just going to go in there and it's just going to write the email and send it in probably about 5 seconds. Joe's digital assistant may get a copy of it and, decide to act on it on its own, right? And say, remind Joe he needs to book the flights, right, for the conference. So then the AI will just go book the flights. But this stuff, you see the foundations of it. It's pretty cool to kind of be living through it. But it's definitely capable of doing it. And I think it's impressive that it catches its own mistakes and just acts like, you obviously, I wouldn't want to just blindly do it, and then have it hit send. It might be like, hey, hey, Joe, that really was his name, but hey, Joe, you're a real jerk, that would, we can't trust these systems entirely, but they're obviously getting pretty sophisticated. And I know you've used it for some other things as well.
Sure. There are a couple of things I would say about this. One of the reasons why it's so slow when it's interacting that way is that it's effectively taking screenshots and then analyzing the screenshot and figuring out what action to take. So Claude is not a multimodal model. So it is interpreting the screenshot and then determining what to do to be able to move on from it. And so there are a couple of things about that. One of them, and I saw an interview with Boris Cherny, who's the developer of this, that said, of course, they're working on this and it will get faster. But even for some of these tasks that you might give it where it is slower than if you were doing it yourself, one of the benefits of using agentic workflows like this, and Co-Work is designed this way, is that you can have multiple instances running at once. And so he referenced that there are a number of things that he will do while he's developing, that he might have 5, 10, 15, or 20 of these running at one time, each taking on particular tasks. Even if one of them is slower than if he did it by himself, the fact that they're doing 20 of them at once and he can orchestrate it all means that it's far more efficient. So even if they don't develop some of those skills further, which they are, and they're working on that, it will become faster. The fact that it's interacting that slowly doesn't mean that it can take away from what you're actually able to get out of this. I've been playing around with Co-Work quite a bit. I find it really interesting, changes the workflow a little bit. They keep making changes to it and updates. Now they have it so that when I'm setting something up in Co-Work, I can access a particular folder on my machine, but also pull in a project that I have on Claude, which is on their servers. I can also incorporate individual files I'd like to have. And there are times that I'm starting off with saying things like, okay, my desktop is a mess. And that's the example they used in their demo. Clean it up. And it organized, it gave a README file to say how it organized, it set up folders, and it was able to do that fairly quickly. And so it can make those changes within your files or your directories pretty quickly. What I like doing then is being able to incorporate a lot of these files together and having it analyze the files, review the files, incorporate it with a project that I have, have, and then using it for evaluative purposes. I'm working on a research paper right now, and I like using Claude to evaluate the paper to tell me what's the likelihood this will be accepted. And it's pretty good. It's very critical. And I think it gives, when I've done the same prompt between Claude and Gemini is a little more generous and generally is, oh, this looks great. This looks like a really great paper. I think it's a high likelihood of success. And Claude will come out and say, I don't know, maybe it's a weak accept at best. Here are the things you need to work on. And so having it do that kind of work with maybe a folder full of files to be able to say, review these, work on this content, give me this get this kind of evaluation, this kind of analysis is really useful. And then working on bigger projects where you can have it generate files and to incorporate with files that you already have, or to be able to consolidate materials that you have. I've been doing quite a bit working on some new course proposals and having it evaluate the drafts that I have, looking at how it can develop it a little bit further. And then the part that I don't really like is all the paperwork. And it's great at following through the paperwork. So I gave it a PDF that is a guideline on how to develop a course proposal. So I can develop the course, I can develop the syllabus, and then I had it put together the course proposal document to follow what that guideline said. It was fantastic. And I was able to give it 5 courses at once. It developed all of them. And then I also asked it to generate an Excel spreadsheet that would say, give me a list of all the requirements for a course proposal, and then evaluate each one and tell me which ones are meeting those requirements. And it found that several of them were missing things. And I said, okay, so fix them. And it was able to go through and fix them, and even found, okay, it has to be 50 words for the course description. This one's at 84 words. So let me give you a revised copy that I can do for this. It's like working with somebody that's a very capable assistant that can take over a lot of the work that you're doing. I wouldn't trust it with all of my files. I wouldn't trust it with taking actions on its own for a lot of the work that I would do. I'm a little more cautious in that regard, but having it generate content that then I can review and I can take some ownership over and be able to do something with, it's incredibly effective at that. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out how can we adopt some of the practices that some of the best computer scientists are using now, and that is using multi-agent workflows, parallel agentic workflows, to be able to maximize our efficiency without taking away what it is that we're able to direct and what we're able to orchestrate. And I think that trying to find the sweet spot there, and it's not always easy, but we're not going to get there unless you experiment with it. And so Co-Work is a great way to start playing around with it and see what you're able to do with some parallel agentic workflows. Co-Work allows you to do that. You can set one going, and then you can start another one, start a third, start a fourth. You can have all going at different times and then check in with them and see what kind of progress they're making.
If you're a kid, you just set it up to do all your homework and all your different classes. But no,
not that we're recommending that.
Yeah. But this was just kind of the end email where it's sent, and just kind of wrapping it up. I've been using it like you for all kind of research and writing and making suggestions. The other thing I should mention is tools. And you can think of them as tools, but you can output it in a Word document. Once you're done, you can ask it to put it in Word. Then you can go edit in Word. I did a PowerPoint presentation the other day, and they're like, "Oh, don't worry, just type it like on a document. We don't need like a formal presentation." What was easier for me just to like type the outline in Claude, and then it made a really nice presentation. And someone's like, "Oh, right away they're like, you didn't have to make this nice." And I said, "I know, I saw the guide, the thing." I said, "But it was just easier for me to type it in Claude and have it make the PowerPoint." And their eyes were like, "Wow," they were kind of a bit surprised, but it was actually easier for me to just kind of freewheel it on the Claude a little bit, and it made a very nice PowerPoint. Now, the other thing, we call it Dario's essay. Dario Amodei, I think is how you say it. He's the CEO, one of the, I think, 7 co-founders of Anthropic, the company that makes Claude, that we've been talking a lot about. And of course, at Davos, he was saying some very provocative things. And he just released a couple days ago, may even been yesterday, I've lost track of my AI days, but it's called The Adolescence of Technology. And it's kind of a follow-up to his, I think it was November 2024, essay called The Machines of Loving Grace. So it was kind of like a more optimistic manifesto. And he does talk in here about how we don't want to be so pessimistic, but we are going to have to take proactive measures to kind of avoid some harms and get the best out of this technology. But if if we hit the next slide, there's kind of 3 things he talks about in the article. He starts by saying, look, as early as the end of 2026, we could have, he doesn't really use the term AGI so much, but it's similar. He calls it powerful AGI. And some other people are like, no, not till 2030. Somebody's like, maybe even 2035. But I think, everybody says like, well, it doesn't really matter that much, right? We're going to have super powerful AI over these years. And the way he defines it is really just in a digital sense, not necessarily that we'll have all the world models for physical understanding of the world and all the robotics will be complete, but that basically the AI will have the knowledge of a top person in their field, basically a Nobel laureate in economics, history, biology. We could break down the fields, and then it'll actually be able to act and complete long horizon tasks. That's what we've just been talking about. And we mentioned last week, I think Cursor had an AI running all week to build a browser. So it's going to do that. And then there are millions of instances of it, right? That's what you're just kind of talking about. Okay, well, you have 6, 7. They're having like millions of AIs kind of act all at once. And he even says, there's this huge debate about scaling, which is just like, well, if you just kind of keep adding more information into the models, does it just keep getting smarter? Can this get us all the way to AGI? I think most people are kind of skeptical, but he's one of the ones who says maybe yes. Same with Hasaba's at DeepMind. So, but they're also working on some of these other things. So he makes the point, and regardless, like scaling is going to get us pretty far, and that's one of the things I also cover in the Substack. I talk about this new Microsoft chip that's going to be really good at generating more high quality synthetic data, which will help with the scaling. So he kind of lays that out as the foundation. And then he moves into, some concerns, right? He's like, okay, well, this is really powerful, regardless of whether it's going to act on its own. Yeah, you could have people use it, and even OpenAI is supposed to soon release some new coding capabilities that they say are can threaten cybersecurity. They're raising their cybersecurity awareness level to high, to make some types of biological weapons. He talks about how governments can use it in surveillance and essentially to become even more anti-democratic maybe were previous democracies. So he expresses that concern. That's a little more on the seizing power. We'll talk about that. It could become autonomous. It could just decide to kind of start doing some things that are undesirable. I think people are putting that in the least likely category, but it's possible. And, as I was saying with democracy, it could help somebody seize power, right? We're talking about commanding all these agents for good and helping us with our academic and related work, but somebody could do it for undesirable things. He talks about how it could be economically disruptive. Obviously, right? It could cost a lot of jobs and, a lot of jobs across a lot of fields. And then there's just kind of these indirect effects, like, if nations become less democratic, if people use it for bad things, if you have substantial economic disruption, certainly if it becomes autonomous, then, the indirect impacts that are negative are, we can't catalog them all here. So he kind of goes through these concerns. And, he kind of also then talks about why it's especially difficult. And everyone's been talking about the speed, right, of how fast this is all happening. And, I think there can be a little bit of difference between, well, there's the speed of the technology. It is still taking people a while to adopt it, but we're starting to see this coming pretty fast, right? We saw Angie's list. I think we talked about it last week. They laid off around 300 people who had made them get really good, salaries over $200,000. They said explicitly they were replaced by AI. So we do have some implementation. The technology is obviously developing super fast. And then he talks about generalizability, right? Where he's like, hey, most other technologies, it could do a job, right? So we had, we had the horse and buggy drivers. They got replaced by cars, but then we needed people to fix the cars, right? But he's like, look, this is generalizable. It's general intelligence. It can do everything. So as fast as you imagine someone, a human, being able, needed for a job, then okay, it can do that, or at least, in terms of filling the gap, somebody's going to have a company that trains it to do that specific task. So he thinks it's more disruptive than previous technologies. And that is one thing I wish people would appreciate more. People always, so AI is a technology, right? And then, this is a logical fallacy, right? Just because something is like something in one way doesn't mean it's like it in all the ways. So just because other technologies over time, right, did not obviously displace all of human labor, define both physical and intellectual labor, does not mean this one won't. It doesn't mean this one will, right? But it is a very unique technology in many ways that we've discussed, including, maybe it's going to build itself, right? So we've never had a wheel decide to build a tractor because it thought, well, gee, I can think of another use of me here being a wheel. Instead of just being on a car, I could also be a tractor. I could also be on a tractor, right? And that's another difference for AI. So those are kind of some of the foundations of his greater concerns. And, he kind of starts with Carl Sagan in the context, but, he does try to kind of be, optimistic, in some sense to me, I grew up Catholic, and there was this idea that maybe life on Earth is not just perfect. I think it's pretty good, but maybe it's not perfect. But if you kind of get through it all, then you can go to heaven, and you kind of have this utopia. And I think almost some of this rhetoric is in. I think most people in AI, that people think the next 10 years are going to be pretty hard. How we're going to manage all this disruption, whether it's good or bad. But then I guess once we get to the other side, we're supposed to all have utopia. It reminds me of my early religious upbringing. So I don't know how to think through all that. But he does kind of say, whether towards the end of the essay, whether we survive that test, and he's talking about managing all this, right? Which you can read. I won't read the quote. And go on to build the beautiful society that he describes in this previous essay, The Machines of Loving Grace, kind of this heaven, right? Or succumb, like he says, to slavery and destruction, right? Where we use the AI to kind of monitor people and enslave them, will depend on our character and our determination of a species, our spirit, and our soul. Now, he might be exaggerating that a little bit, because obviously if we lose control and the AI it takes over, then it's not going to matter. Our character and our soul is probably not going to necessarily count for much. But I think people agree that that's kind of on the lower end of the likelihood. The higher likelihood is okay, how do we manage all the economic disruption, or we are willing to provide something like a UBI and support each other. We have all these kind of more deadly weapons, or we able to kind of not use them or manage them as we have other weapons. And that's going to become our character and their determination, because this is a really powerful technology. Like, even we were just talking about Claudebot and Moltbot and all these other agents, right? And these ones are using, they're going to have some restraints on them that would have to be overcome. But somebody with some technical knowledge and not so great a character could build one of these autonomous agents and kind of have it do bad stuff. So that's where I think he's coming at with the character.
I think what's really interesting, when I read through this and I was thinking about what he had to say on stage at the World Economic Forum last week, and a lot of the messaging that's coming out from Anthropic. Now, of course, they've cast themselves as the more safety-oriented platform. That's why they many of the founders left OpenAI and founded Anthropic. But there's an incentive, of course, for most founders, CEOs of an AI platform to build up the capabilities and talk about what people will be able to do with those capabilities. There's a profit motive there. A difference for Dario is that he's presenting a lot of the concerns, even talking about it would be great if we could slow down a bit. He has a real strong feeling that we need to be able to compete the West against China to make sure that we're able to develop it first. But I would take what he has to say very seriously for a couple of reasons. One, it does work a little bit against his own profit motive. And it's not just about building up the capabilities and encouraging people to use it for unfettered application. The other aspect of this is that of all of the companies, maybe 2 or 3 have a real sense internally of how close they might be getting to AGI. And when we see what they've been able to do with Anthropic, with Claude Code, with the most recent version of Sonnet 4.5, and also looking at the recursive self-improvement process, I think that there are glimmers that perhaps some people internally at Anthropic are seeing the timeline is much shorter, because we see how much closer we're getting to some of those developments. And so it might not just be just increasing the amount of compute or the amount of training, but also some of the other tools that they've been developing and ways that the model can really be developing with this. I just think I view it a little differently than some of the other companies. The other thing about this that was interesting that I heard from Alex Wiener-Gross in another podcast was he was talking about the constitution for Claude, the Soul Doc, as it's been referenced, and that when they were developing it, they were actually asking Claude for its input. And he said that's already a recursive self-improvement. We're already in the point where an AI model is helping develop its own constitution. And that seems to reflect a lot of the other beliefs within Anthropic. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be there soon. It doesn't mean that all of the other dominoes will fall in place. But I think that he probably has a better sense of this than most others in the field. Maybe not more than Demis Hassabis or maybe a handful of others, but he seems to have a much better vision of what's happening, what's likely to happen very soon, and how quickly we're going to be able to get to something like really advanced, very capable AI, if not AGI, and how disruptive that's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would add there is, it's not really that different than, what a lot of like kind of nonprofits, people who left OpenAI, even though they could have stayed and, they already made a lot of money, right? As I said, okay, I could leave, I'll be okay, right? They could have made a lot more money, they left because they're worried about these safety concerns and, how fast we're getting to AGI. So, they almost like kind of have a reverse incentive. They're making money now, but clearly less than they made at OpenAI. If you look at some of the evaluation labs, there's one called Meter, METR. I forget what it stands for. I listened to a lot of their leaders over the summer on podcasts, and they were talking about the rate of advance of agentic AI. This is, even just what's already happened is way blown away the kind of the timelines that they were suggesting, highly qualified people from what you might consider to be kind of a neutral perspective. There definitely like a few outliers, but there's like Gary Marcus, right, saying, oh, we need more of these things. But he's saying like 5 to 20 years. His 20-year thing is kind of out there. Yan LeCun saying like, it's like 10 years. He's a big critic of current approaches. And I always say like, us both, like, we work with students, right? Generally for the most part in between maybe the ages of 14 and 24 at various times. And, they're only, so what are they going to be between 24 and 34 when everyone kind of agrees that we're going to be at something, AGI or something like it. So to me, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah. I think I've heard a lot of other people kind of making that same point, Stefan, and I agree with you. Once we've got to the point where almost everyone in the community is saying, yes, it's going to happen. They believe it's going to happen. It's just a question of how long and what other developments need to occur. Then now we just need to, not waste our time thinking about, hey, is that possible? And start thinking about how we're going to handle some of these concerns and challenges that Dario is outlining in this document. And it's certainly one worth reading. It's 19,000 words. It's not a short blog post, but it's something that he put a lot of time and effort into. And I think is a very thoughtful account of some of those concerns and how we could possibly address some of them. I think he certainly seems to be feeling some responsibility to raise the awareness to make sure that people around the world are considering what are we going to do when we're facing these economic disruptions, societal disruptions, some of the developments that are happening with AI, that if we're only focusing on the next couple of months, we're going to miss the big picture of where we're going to go and how we're going to be able to adapt. Well, Stefan, thanks for all of that. And thank you all for watching. Next week, send us any ideas if you have them about what you'd like us to see us talk about, if there are developments you'd like to see. And especially if you have any experiments, if you've been trying out with one of these, Moltbot, or you've been playing around with Co-Work or Claude Code, and you see some different applications and ways that we can bring that into the classroom, we'd love to hear it.